there is a God of love in the Old Testament. There is one there. And there is a God of holiness in the New Testament. You just read Revelation.
When you hear this struggle that people can have, which I would assume you've heard, that the God of the Old Testament looks so different than the God of the New Testament, what would you say in response? I think you're speaking to that, but I want to ask you very directly.
Yeah. I would say that there are two very fundamental characteristics to God that he reveals himself. God is holy, and that we find, he says it very clearly in Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20 in particular, but he says it again and again, I am holy. And he calls us to follow him in that way. That holiness of God doesn't change from Old Testament to New Testament. It's the same God, the same work, the same holiness. And from the beginning, when God creates the world, he sets up these examples by separating the sky, the dry land, the waters. And he says, yes, and there are certain things that I want to separate because that's teaching and understanding of who I am, and because that will be the best life for you by which I can bring life. And he does that through the Old and New Testament. And the other essential characteristic is that God is love. 1 John 5 is a great example of that in the New Testament, but again and again, I mean, I've tried to suggest already that there are a number of examples where God is love in the Old Testament. Without his love, Israel would never have survived. And his love to establish a covenant after the flood with Noah, where he says, for all people of the world, I will never destroy the world again in this way. Where he says to Abram, I want you to come out and follow me so that through you, I can be a blessing to all nations of the world. I can bless them. And Israel, in his covenant there at that mountain at Sinai, he says, I want to bless you, and I want you to be a priesthood so that through you all nations will be blessed. And with David as king, he says, through you, I will bring one who will come, and there will always be someone to rule over my people from your line. And ultimately, that is Jesus himself who comes. So there is this love of God that is there, and this holiness of God that is there, because God is not equal to the world. He is not the world. He is separate from the world. And in some sense, that's what he calls us to as well, which is tough. It's difficult because God is able to bring love and holiness together perfectly, and we are not. We fail. And going back to the Garden of Eden and the beginning in Genesis, all of the sins are part of that failure to understand what God calls us to. The holiness has to include a respect for other people and for who you are, who I am, our ability to choose and to make decisions and not to be forced into things that we don't want. And yet the love of God includes that forgiveness and that power. And it's there in the Old Testament. Again and again, he forgives Israel. Again and again, he forgives the people of even the Assyrians in Nineveh. And you have this wonderful story. You know the story in the prophet Hosea. Hosea is called by God to marry a woman named Gomer. This woman is we don't know exactly her story, but as one person has said, she is a woman with a past, and she comes into this married relationship, and he loves her. But as the chapter goes on, by the end of chapter 1 and into chapter 2 and the beginning of chapter 3, Gomer has left Hosea, and she has gone out, and she has become involved with lots of other men and involved in all kinds of ways. and she has been reduced to the status of a slave. And God says to Hosea, you go out again, you find Gomer, and you buy her back. And that's what he does. And the story is so profound because it says there, he bought her for so many shekels or whatever it is in terms of silver, but also for barley and other things. There are these additional units. And you can imagine Hosea, who was not a rich man, going back and cleaning out his bank account and then taking what was ever left as well in his house, gathering it together and bringing it there to buy back Gomer. And he buys her back and brings her back into his house. And he says, we will remain apart for a certain period of time so that we can again grow to trust one another in that relationship before, but then we will come together again. And God says, this story that you have lived is my story, because that's exactly what Israel has done to me. It has turned against me, even though I loved it. And the people of God have gone away. And now I am going out and I will buy them back from that exile that they have gone into. And I will bring them back and I will love them again. Because my love has never departed, is never left, but I will show that love to them again. So yeah, there is a God of love in the Old Testament. There is one there. And there is a God of holiness in the New Testament. You just read Revelation.